How are you all today?
Good.
All right. At least one good. It's good. Uh, Before we get started, thoughts and concerns about final project. So you might have noticed you no longer will have video assignments to do. There's only a few weeks left in the course, but you guys are gonna hopefully spend that time researching something cool to argue with yourself about for your final project. Uh, so anybody kind of started playing with that? Thoughts, questions, concerns, anything like that? All right. Well, feel free to, if you want, you guys can run your ideas by me before you get too deep into them. I'm happy to field any questions or concerns, or if you're having trouble finding papers and stuff. Um, all right, nothing. You guys are good to go. All right. Well, like I said, there won't be any more video assignments. You will have workshop assignments and some quizzes over the textbook reading throughout for the rest of the semester. Pretty much everything is due right before finals too. I think there is maybe a workshop that last week, and I think there's maybe one more like very short assignment. So keep up with that through the last week of the course. But all these big projects, including the creativity project, is due before finals. Anything? You guys got nothing? Good to go. Yeah.
Where do we submit the creative?
There should be a. That's a good question. It should be on Moodle. Did you find where it's posted the creativity project on Moodle?
I saw where it said it would be posted like on week 3, I think.
Yeah.
I don't see it under week,
Interesting.
but I might just.
All right. Let me yeah, if you don't mind, can you stay after class for 5 seconds and just we'll see if we can find it. That's a good question. I want to make sure that I don't forget to add that. But there'll be like a slot where you can just post you can either post it or you can post a Google Drive link. Yeah.
So, we make something just physical piece of art for that project. Can we bring it in, or would you suggest we still take a photo of it and upload it, or both?
Both, yeah. I've had both for sure. Yeah, I'd love to see it if you want to bring it on the last day or something. So there's only going to be, again, you guys are going to be here for the first part of Thanksgiving, right? Next week on Tuesday. Everybody's going to come to class. Don't make me come here and give a lecture to nobody. Um, what's that?
I'll be here.
All right. Well, at least if a few of you who are interested are here, I will come and do it. Um, so after Thanksgiving, we only have two classes. So um, so bring it on the last day if you want to show and share and tell, show and tell. I've had people bake things before for everybody on the last day. I mean, almost everything you can think of has been done. So blow my mind.
And does that mean we're not gonna have like a final meet on the final day? Like the
There's a finals week, and we will not have an in-person final. So
Okay.
y'all, there's no in-person final. The project's due before that, so hopefully you guys can focus on your other classes during finals week.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, I always hated taking tests when I was in college, so I decided to not burden you guys with such a thing. Although I've variably regretted that perhaps a few times, but it's all good. Uh, I think the project is good, and I can tell how deeply you've thought about this from your presentation. So, yeah. Oh,
I watched your like the video, but I also saw like the final the final project on there, but I also didn't see like a thing where you guys turn into creative.
okay. Maybe yeah, maybe something happened. We'll check it out.
So I already read what the final project, but I don't know about the creativity.
Yeah, let me make sure. If we'll look after class and see if we can't find it if it got hidden or something. And I'll send out an email to you guys or something. But it's a very open, it's very open ended. You know, every single one of you has something that you do. I don't know what it is, but everybody seems to have something. And I want you to just yeah, get some credit for putting your creative juices into something related to the solar system, which is pretty open ended since it's all happening there, anyways. So, any other thoughts or concerns about that kind of stuff before we keep cruising? We're we're getting out there. So we're gonna get into Mars today, but we talked about Venus, and we kind of closed down. What do you guys remember about Venus from last time? Any deep thoughts or anything? Yeah, Tammy.
I watched the video online. We had the
Okay.
last week. But I noticed that, well, there was a lot of interesting things about Venus, first of all, but we ended kind of on the talk of the resurrection.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So we talked about Mesopotamia and the Sumerians and how when Venus dips below where their perception, they consider it the underworld.
Yeah.
And then it comes back up, and everybody is really amazed by that. And you mentioned that there's a lot of different societies that really prize.
Most of them, actually, it seems like. Yeah.
Yes. And you asked us to kind of theorize
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. What do you think?
Morality.
Morality.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me about that.
I think that it kind of gives people hope, and then when they see something kind of disappear and then it comes back up again, it kind of just like instills like a drive or a fire of hope. We all need hope, I guess. I mean, I don't know. That's kind of what
I think you're on to I think you're on to something. Does anybody have did anybody think about that question too? Like, why are all these disparate civilizations that are apparently unrelated coming up with a similar story of this, some sort of heroic god descending to the underworld, maybe probably triumphing over something and then rising. They all sort of map this story onto Venus. Why do you guys think that is? Yeah.
Like came to mind that was like redemption, maybe. It like, because it dips down and like comes back up, kind of like I don't know, learning from your mistakes sort of thing.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, so hope, redemption. What do you got, Isaac?
I don't know. This is like kind of a simpler, like a lot simpler of an explanation in a way, but like just like everybody loves a good story like that, and especially in those kinds of times when like that everything, all right, you're like looking up at the stars and looking up in the sky all the time, like, and so when you make that observation of something like that happening, like you kind of you just kind of create a story for it, and because it's like out in the sky like that, then you would attest it to like some sort of godly being or something like that, and then I think just like disappearing and coming back up again, like it makes sense for that to be going to the underworld and coming back, and like so I feel like it just like I can understand why they would have done it like that, or why so many people that seem to not have any correlation would have a similar story like that.
Yeah, so we sort of map what happens inside of us onto the outside world. And I think that's true too. All these things are true. I want to get some more because these are all I think these are all right in some way. Yeah.
Just bouncing off what you said, it gives people something to believe in, and it gives them like justification, like something to follow.
In their own lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this earlier, but like the unknown is like bound to leave people uncomfortable. And with that disconnect and discomfort, you have to steer them.
Yeah, the unknown. Yeah, I think that's a huge part of the puzzle. Yeah, Brennan.
So for me, I got thinking about like the religious side of it. This is the Roman name for the goddess of love. And I think it's a great metaphor for love in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but also very circular at times. So just realizing that they put a good name onto what was happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I think these are all great. I think they all kind of go together. This is cool. I'm glad you guys thought about this. This is awesome. Yeah.
I was just thinking of the way that like the human brain is sort of wired to recognize patterns between things, even if they're not actually there. And I feel like almost every person sort of has their own sort of experience where they feel like they have to tackle something big,
Yeah.
like quest in their own eyes. And it changes them when they come back, but it's still like the same person. And so I feel like that story kind of goes into the human experience, and the people who were creating these stories about it all experience something like that because that's just something that everyone feels.
I think you guys nailed this one. Yeah, Dante.
I agree with everyone, but I also have a more literal theory.
Okay.
humans have been Homo sapiens have existed for almost over hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah. Keeps getting older and older.
We don't know, and we've probably been telling stories for that long because that's humanity's most like effective way to communicate information to each other.
Absolutely.
Stories. And I feel like one of the reasons that maybe so many of these cultures, ancient ones, had very similar like stories, adjacent correlated ones, is probably just because they're some of like the simplest, oldest stories people think of is like, ones where, people do something and then, or they go like, they journey into like hardship and then they come back from that hardship is, I think of like hunting, right? Every time humans go to hunt, they go into danger, they get it, they come back.
Yeah.
Changed.
Yeah. I think you guys have completely nailed it. Every single person brought like a little piece to this puzzle. Which is awesome, actually. I've never had a class that actually just nailed this one so tightly. I'm glad you guys thought about it. I'm glad we stopped there as opposed to maybe just me telling you what I thought. But I think you guys are all right. I think that everything from what Brennan's saying about, whether it's a relationship that you go through, I think life is constantly throwing you into the underworld to some extent, right? Sometimes things just don't go well. And actually, that's pretty normal. Maybe, you lose a friend or a loved one. We're all wrestling with death and all of the time, and you got to get back up, right? And so, that could just be, it could literally be something trivial and small, like you didn't get the grade on the test that you wanted. It could be super deep, like you lose a loved one or something, right? Or you didn't get that job that you really wanted, or whatever. This is kind of the fundamental project of being a human being, though, is being someone who's able to sort of transform from that state of getting knocked down into getting up and getting after it again. And like, if you look back, by the time you're my age, it's like you've hopefully gotten a lot better at that, because when you first start out and you're 20 whatever years old, it's first time you get knocked down, it can be like super, super devastating. And I think in some sense, being a human is that project of learning how to get back on the horse again. And I think these people I think it's just such a fundamental human feature. It's like, I think everybody recognized that. And so, of course, when the brightest star in the sky, Venus, does this, pattern, um, like you were saying, who was it? You were talking, Isaac was talking about seeing patterns and mapping them onto our lives. It's like, that's what we do. And even at the beginning of this course, we talked about how that can get us into trouble because we tend to bias what we see in the world in terms of our human experiences. I'll make an even bigger argument next semester, but I think the story we tell about the universe in general is something that we really want to see identity with our human experience for. And so, yeah, I think that's yeah. What do you got?
Well, one thing that I don't have any thoughts for, but it's a question I want to pose about Venus that I thought was odd, and it relates to Mars because Mars is the opposite. Venus in a lot of cultures has been connected to like females, feminism, and then Mars the opposite.
Yeah,
yeah. And it's weird because also often they're both connected to war.
Yeah.
To what it means in war, but different aspects of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know I don't know why. I mean, most people will probably know that the symbols we have for female and male are Venus and Mars.
That's right. Yeah.
So
where do those symbols come from?
Those are Roman, I believe.
Roman.
I believe the Romans made those.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So there's you bring up an interesting point. Like, by the time the Romans get a hold of Mars, it's become a masculine deity, and it's associated with war. There's a very interesting transition in Western. Again, this course in general, my knowledge base is pretty much limited to the West. I don't know that much about ancient Chinese history or anything, unfortunately. Maybe someday I'll get there. But in the West, there's a really interesting bifurcation where the very, very early religions tended to have male and female deities that were associated with everything. Even the very primitive, like pre-Hebrew Judeo-Christian tradition was the Canaanite tradition. And the God of the Old Testament, which is referred to as like Yahweh or something, comes from this storm god in the Canaanite tradition, which is called Yah. And Yah actually has a consort, a female partner named Ashtaroth. And you see this going back, where there's usually male and female components. And then sort of after the Judeo-Christian breaking point, really, with monotheism and all of that, the feminine side kind of gets waylaid in some sense. It sort of gets sidelined, I guess is a better way of putting it. Yeah.
As something that I do think is interesting about, because you brought up the like Judeo sort of culture, it was interesting to me because there's many different names for uh, God in Judaism, the Hebrew Bible, but it's odd. Well, you did bring up the storm god, but there's two distinct names that are brought up. One is the one you mentioned, and which is often referred to as the storm god, the fierce god, the fierce deity, right? And then the opposite is Adonai, or a I believe.
Is it like a softer version?
Yeah, because there's the Adonai, there's the forgetting which one's which, but there's two different gods, and one of them is significantly it's connected with men and is significantly more uh you know pragmatic and also not violent but strict and not unforgiving. The other one is forgiving, nurturing, been connected mostly with like mothers, but they're the same person, the same entity, which is
that checks out.
The name or the pronouns of God is switched by the speaker, who is speaking to or from.
I think it also tracks with the fact that people in the ancient world really saw Venus as two different stars and two different deities, and there was a real transformation. I think definitely some Greek philosophers started thinking that this was probably the same star, and then by Roman times there was probably some merger of that. But yeah, it is there's definitely a switch over, and I'm not going to get too deep into the stories about Mars, but I think one thing to keep in mind with the reason that it's even worth talking about all this mythology, I think, is I think that it's really important to recognize that our ancestors weren't just these primitive cave people or whatever. Like they had these really sophisticated ways of beholding human experience. This whole thing the fact that we all sort of came upon this fundamental human experience that's mapped onto this myth that they're all telling, right? And it's not like they're just, these sort of superstitious idiots who think that there's actually like, necessarily some deity that's descending and it's more representational than that at the end of the day. So, when you talk about a god of war represented by Mars for the Romans, like, is that really like some guy in the sky to them who has like a beard and he's like sponsoring wars and stuff? Or are they recognizing that inside of everyone there is some sort of, pattern that'll take place? How many of you guys have gotten angry at someone you loved before accidentally? 100%, right? And like, what did that feel like? It's a pretty weird feeling. It's almost like it happens to you without you having to do anything. Like no one ever. Let me ask you this: did anyone ever have to teach you how to be angry? Right? So there's these programs that we're born with, and in some sense, I think a lot of these pagan gods represent those internal emotional structures inside of us that we're preloaded with as human beings. And that feeling of having to get back up after you've gotten knocked down is one of those. And I think that the deities that they associated with Venus in that case represented that internal program that reorients you and remotivates you towards getting yourself up and back on the horse again.
I just double checked the names. Yeah, there's three. Yeshua is the storm god.
Okay.
Mentioned, which is I will have to get into the fact that Israelites and Jews are two different people.
Indeed.
The Israelites were to the north, the Jews and the Kingdom of Judea was to the south. They had kind of different differences. The Jews had Elohim, which is the female, God, the creator God, the God that created everything and is nurturing. And there's Adonai is the name of the fierce.
I see.
one.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, this is another way, in some sense, depending on how symbolically you want to take this. These represent just the pieces that are inside of all of us, in some sense, and I think that's maybe the most charitable way to look at all these mythologies. It's why I think they're even worth mentioning. You know, people for many, many years had this very pluralistic sense of the enchanted world and how nature reflected the parts of ourselves back at us. And I think that's in many ways what was happening with the naming and stories. I mean, I don't think it's insignificant that we still call these planets after their mythological names. It's like, that's pretty significant. We still often name, like, we'll find new bodies in the solar system. They've been kind of boring with these interstellar objects, but often they'll be naming bodies still after they'll find new moons and things, and they'll still name them after these mythological characters. And there must be some part deep down, at least inside of people, that recognizes that these are actually pretty meaningful stories that reflect something that we're all experiencing. So, any other thoughts about Venus before we start looking at Mars today? Yeah.
The only planet named after the sun.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a very beautiful planet. Maybe the beauty thing, I don't know. I guess men can be beautiful too, but that was it really glows, and
I know Gaia.
it's an
our
interesting
planet,
thing. What's that?
Gaia by the Greeks is the Titan Gaia is female.
But we don't use that name anymore.
Yeah, but Earth is
Gaian. Yeah, the guy. Do you guys know about the Gaia hypothesis?
Terra is also. Yeah.
Like, there was this scientist in the maybe late 70s named Lynn Margulis. There's one of her collaborators is named Lovelock. Forget his first name. But she spearheaded this idea that the Earth was sort of the superorganism and that it was perhaps part of a community of other Earth-like planets throughout the galaxy, which is a really cool idea. She also came up with, for any of you biology people out there, we have these little structures inside of our cells that are kind of the power plants for our cells. They're called mitochondria. And the dominant idea is that mitochondria, they have their own DNA that's separate from your cell's DNA. They're really, really weird little things. And she came up with this hypothesis that basically the primitive eukaryotic, let's say animal-like cells invited these bacteria to come and live inside of them because they were really good at generating power for the cells. And we've grown to be symbiotic with these bacteria to the point that they just get passed along from generation to generation. It's really she was a really brilliant lady. Not sure if she's still alive or not. All right, you had one more thing.
One little note
Yeah.
mentioned about naming planets.
Yeah.
We found a new moon of Uranus.
Oh, cool.
And they're going to name it, like all the other moons, after one of Shakespeare's plays or one of Alexander Pope's poems.
Huh, interesting.
Like all the other ones.
Yeah, we'll have a little time for Uranus.
I don't know why they did that for Uranus first.
Shakespeare. That guy gets a lot of play. Yeah.
Well, Ceres and Vesta are both Roman goddesses.
Yeah.
Moons, right?
Were they Titans?
The dwarf.
Right. Okay.
What was the name of them?
The twin of.
Oh, are they planets? Yeah, not technically, I guess, but they're.
Share 'em.
That's
Ceres and Vesta are both sort of rounded-looking asteroids. Those are hard ones to explain, actually.
Like,
What do you got?
You just did.
Oh, I got Chiron mixed up with Ceres because they're both dwarf planets and they look very similar. One of them is Moon's twin.
Yeah, those ones are really weird. We're not going to have time to do a whole class on the asteroid belt, but it's pretty bizarre. The standard consensus picture is that it's some leftovers from the birth of the solar system. There was a very famous NASA scientist who was championing during his career the idea that it was a destroyed planet from earlier. But Ceres and Vesta are impossible to explain their roundness if they started off as their current size. They don't have enough mass to have rounded themselves out. So that story has yet to be determined. And of course, beyond Mars is where this asteroid belt is. So before we get to Jupiter on Thursday, we will have passed through the asteroid belt. So yeah, something to keep an eye on. I think there's more to that story to come. All right, any last thoughts on Venus before we leave her behind and move on to Mars? We've already dealt with Earth a bit. I think we'll circle back and talk a bit more. I'm trying to get my wife to come and talk to you guys about the origin of life, because she's got a really good way of talking about this thing. And as you see, when we start looking at Mars today, life is a really big piece of the story as far as humans have related to Mars, because we have kept hope alive for so long that Mars will be the place where we find life in the solar system. And some have argued that we already have found life on Mars, but it is far from certain that that has happened. So we will circle back to Earth one last time to think about how life gets started, where it comes from, that kind of thing. But we're moving past Earth today. By the way, you can actually see Mars at sunset today if you're in the perfect location. It's kind of, this is a real live picture of the organization of where the planets are today. I just wanted to show you this. So Mars is kind of behind the sun right now, which means it's pretty little. It's going to be hard to see, but it's going to set with the sun, right? You can imagine that as we turn our back on the sun, we're going to be able to see Mars for just a little bit right after sunset. So that's your best bet. But you actually can see Jupiter tonight. If you had a really nice telescope, you could probably see Uranus too. I think you can see Saturn tonight too, but again, Saturn's rings are not showing, so it's not the coolest thing to see. Jupiter is worth seeing. If you guys haven't seen it, you get some binoculars, find a friend who has some binoculars. You can see the moons around Jupiter with binoculars. It is super far out. I know it seems like it wouldn't be as cool as looking at a picture on Google or something, but it is really weird.
See something in person.
It's very different. Yeah, the first time you see it through binoculars, the moons around Jupiter, you start to, I don't know, everything just feels a little bit more close to home somehow.
I always get vertigo when I do that.
Yeah, start falling over. So let's get into talking about Mars a little bit. There's a lot of angles we could attack Mars at. We'll see how much we can get through in the next 50 minutes or so. We've kind of made it through. So Venus and Earth are often thought of as twins. I think mainly because of their size and density and all of those things. We talked about the moon already. Mercury didn't make this picture list. Mars is over here, right? It's in some sense it is similar. It's rocky. It's ironous. Not too dissimilar than the other Rockies we've looked at, but it's pretty small actually. Let's see, what do you have? It's 15% of the Earth's volume, right? So remember, volume scales with a cube law. So even though it's maybe only, I don't know, I'm just eyeballing it here, half the radius of the Earth, it's quite a bit smaller. So that means that it has only 11% of the Earth's mass, which results in it only having something like 38% of the Earth's gravity. So that makes it a little bit more sturdy of a place to walk around on than the moon, but not too much. It looks like it's only about 2 moon radii wide, right? So it's not that much sturdier than walking around on the moon. A little bit. I think the moon's like a sixth of our gravity, something like that. So it's a very desert, barren planet. So Venus was hot, super thick carbon dioxide atmosphere. Mars is actually kind of similar atmosphere. It's also mostly carbon dioxide, but there's almost none of it, which is pretty weird, actually, especially because, Venus is actually closer to the sun. Venus also doesn't have a magnetic field. Mars, no atmosphere, almost no atmosphere left. Also, no appreciable magnetic field left anymore. Yeah.
I surmise it's probably because it's colder, actually.
Well, it is cold because it doesn't have an atmosphere. So if you remember that Venus, part of the reason Venus is so hot is that all that weight crushing down, right, leads to, it's got great greenhouse trapping of heat. The air itself is kind of just dense, and you can imagine that it holds on to heat really well. But if you don't have an atmosphere, Mars gets really crazy temperature swings. If it's in the sun on a nice day on Mars, in so much as there's nice days on Mars, it could be, I don't know, 70 degrees, something like that. But then, turns to nighttime and it's minus 150 degrees, right? There's no way for there's no air to hold on to all of that heat at night is what it comes down to, right? So it's going to be an interesting thing. I've been thinking a lot about lately why because the Americans seem, particularly since the beginning, fixated on Mars. They sent a lot of craft out there, while the Soviets, as we talked about, they were fixated on Venus. They both seem like equally unpleasant places for very different reasons. And of course, if you guys are paying attention at all to the whole SpaceX and Elon world, Elon's dreaming of setting up Mars colonies eventually. We'll look at the plausibility of that. Hopefully, by the end of class, we can look at some features of how that would work. I mean, in some sense, Mars it's very far away. So the moon's like what, a couple of days away by if you took a rocket, let's say the Apollo program era stuff. Venus is like 6 months away with the same rockets. So that's going to be a rough journey. I mean, it's a very ambitious project to imagine going there.
And then Mars is like what, 8 months?
Oh, sorry, did I say Venus? I meant Mars. Sorry, Mars is very far away. Yeah, it's many months. It's going to take maybe it's 8 months. I don't know. It's something like that. It's much longer than you would want to be sitting on a tiny spacecraft for. So that's going to be tricky. And we'll look at the project about like what it would look like to actually turn Mars into a place that's livable. Let's hold on to these thoughts, because that's kind of in the background. Is why are people so interested in Mars? I think in some sense part of it is because for most of history they thought they were going to find creatures there, but also because we need a stepping stone if we're going to go explore all of the other star systems eventually, which I think will happen eventually. Let's look at this thing as a planet though for a second first. So this is the first planet that we've gotten to that's actually outside of our own orbit. And this gave all of the early astronomers a complete headache because, as you can see, the interior planets, of course, they're getting more gravitational pull, so they go faster, right? This was the Kepler relationship that we talked about originally. Well, what that means, of course, is that our year is much faster than Mars's year. It's about twice as fast, not quite. It's like 1.88 or something like that. But the funny thing is that you can see sometime, we'll be approaching Mars in the sky and it'll be going in one direction. But then as we surpass it in our orbit, it starts to act like it's going backwards in the sky, which was really confusing to the astronomers. So they started thinking about these outer planets, especially Mars, as being, in some sense, having a mind of their own, right? Because sometimes they go forwards, sometimes they go backwards in the sky. It's super confusing. And that's in fact where the name planet comes from. In Greek, it just means wanderer, right? So really the speed of these orbits is what determines that strange position in the sky. So you guys have probably heard the astrologers say like, this planet's in retrograde or something, right? What they mean is that the planet's going the other direction in the sky from when it used to. It's not really changing its direction in space, but it appears to be going the other way across the sky all of a sudden as Earth moves underneath it in its orbit. Make sense? So, people have been watching this thing for a while. Our good friend Huygens, I showed you his telescope with the lens up in the tree when we were talking about telescopes before. He was this Dutch astronomer back in, I believe it was in the 1600s. He was the first to really draw a map of Mars, and he was actually, I think, in some sense, because he made these first sketches, he really got people thinking about maybe there's something happening on Mars because it looked like even to Huygens back then, it appeared like there were these almost ocean-like or forested regions on it, right? It kind of had a green, darkened appearance that would vary at different times of the year. Very, very ominous. And so as people got better and better telescopes, they started to refine these drawings. And what did they see? They saw these lines on the surface of Mars. In fact, they made an entire system, like basically made a science out of it in the 1800s, right? They thought of these as the canal systems that the people who lived on Mars used essentially as canals. And of course, we don't really even have many canals today. But back, in the 1800s, canals were actually a really big transport system. I grew up in Ohio. We got canals all over the place, and they basically have these horses that drag these boats through these systems of locks over steep terrain, even much the way that the railroad industry ended up kind of supplanting it later. But anyways, people back then, they saw canals everywhere on Mars, which is really interesting. This went on for a long time. So let's see here. I think this drawing set is actually from the early 1900s. This is called Mars and Canals. And you can see that people were really, really taking this idea that something was happening on Mars in terms of creatures like us quite seriously. And this went on, really up into the middle of the 20th century, which is really wild. Actually, people didn't realize that there were no creatures on Mars until we went there in the 1970s. And even then, they split hairs about it. But they didn't realize that seasonal darkening wasn't actually forests and stuff until we essentially sent flyby missions out there in the 1960s and 70s. So it has a long legacy of being a life hopeful place. Mars has got 2 moons. They look like this. It's a joke. They're very, very, very tiny. They're on the order, I think, of 7 miles and 14 miles, respectively. Phobos and Deimos. They're actually much. They look a lot more like captured asteroids than they do much like moons. Although they seem to have similar composition to Mars itself. They're kind of red, dusty. I think people call them dirty potatoes. They're sort of these kind of cobbled together chunks of rock. I think some of the more popular ideas is that they're maybe just Mars got hit with something at some point, kicked up some stuff into the atmosphere, and these are like the last pieces that are left over. And they're both on their way out too. So the Phobos and Deimos. So Deimos is actually the little one. It's leaving. It's moving away from Mars, kind of like our moon is moving away. And it's expected to eventually disappear, fly off into nowhere. And then Phobos is actually getting closer. Its orbit is actually descending. So it's actually doesn't have enough forward velocity. It's kind of falling into Mars. So in a few tens of millions of years, it should just fall onto the surface of Mars. I don't expect any of us will be around to see that one happen. So I don't know. These things are barely moons as far as I can tell. But they're worth mentioning. So yeah, in the 1960s, we started sending these flyby missions called the Mariner missions to go and check it out. Mariner 4, I think, was the first one. Several uncrewed missions. Eventually, in '76, we landed the Viking 1 rover on the surface, and the Viking 1 was really quite fascinating because this was the one where the the scientists thought that they would finally be able to answer the question of whether there was stuff living. They didn't think there was people anymore, right? After the Mariner flybys, they kind of went, well, these canals are obviously just cracks in the surface of Mars and so forth. But they still held out that maybe there'd be some bugs, some little microbes or something living on the surface. And it's quite interesting. They still haven't totally solved this problem. So they did a really ingenious experiment. They basically took this. They had these 2, let's say, test tubes that they basically collected soil into them, and they inject some sort of radioactive substance into the soil. And they basically say, well, if there's something alive, I think it was a radio-labeled carbon, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. They're basically like, if there's something alive in there, it will metabolize this radioactive substance, and it will make radioactive carbon dioxide as a result of it. Sort of like, you know, how humans, we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide and water, right? They thought the same thing would happen. You'd be able to see this radioactive carbon dioxide inside of the test tube. And they did this experiment. They did it many times with this Viking thing, and they kept getting a positive result with it, actually. So they kept seeing that something was metabolizing the radio-labeled substance, right? But they also had a mass spec, which is basically this machine that just vaporizes stuff and then looks at the various chemicals. And they couldn't see any traces of organic molecules, right? Stuff that life would be made out of. So it was kind of a split room. Half the scientists were like, well, the radio-labeled controlled release experiments showed that there was life there. And then the mass spec people were like, well, but we don't see any organic molecules. Now, over the years, and actually quite recently, it turns out that we've repeated some of these mass spec experiments with some of the newer rovers that are out there. And there are organic compounds there. We've also been able to see traces of methane there. Now, still a split jury, because turns out that you can make methane without life forms, and nobody realized that until quite recently. You guys ever go out into like the Kalmiopsis and see all this serpentine rock stuff before? You ever see this? Like, it's almost like jade, like it's almost like this turquoise colored rock. It forms in the cracks between these magmatic rocks. It's all over the place in the Kalmiopsis. Very beautiful stuff. Turns out that the process of making this serpentine rock actually can release, it can react with carbon dioxide in the air, and it can actually create methane as a result of it. It'll pull the carbon out. And so there's this chemical process when this serpentine rock is made. And they think, so some of the scientists are essentially arguing, well, it's probably a serpentinization reaction that's creating the methane on Mars. But it's pretty weird, because the levels of methane go up and down every year. They change, actually. And so there's an argument to be made that these cycles reflect something that we would see on Earth with respect to, you know, the changing of the life cycles for plants and stuff on the planet as well. We would expect that from a plant that was alive. So it's like the battle is still on, and there's so many other pieces of this puzzle too. The present mission that's out there right now has started collecting samples to send back to Earth, but they don't actually have the capabilities of sending them back to Earth. So the hope is that they'll build some sort of other, you know, device that they'll land, which will grab all of the bottles that the rover has collected now and put them on rockets and send them back to Earth. But some people are not happy about that. Why?
Could be like a biological risk.
It could be bad, yeah. There's a couple of good horror movies about this kind of thing out there. I don't remember the names of them off the top of my head. I think I've seen them all. Yeah.
Kind of unrelated note, but I do think it's kind of funny that the reason Mars is red is because it's all rust.
It is rusty. That is a good
Just
point.
iron oxide.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of oxygen. That's true. There is oxygen aplenty. Somebody else had? You had same
You
thing?
don't want to introduce anything that foreign to our.
Yeah, it could be bad. We just don't know, right? So, you know, I think personally a pretty good chance would be, even if we found bacteria on Mars, we'd bring them back here and we'd be like, oh man, these are just normal bacteria, right? It seems like there's a pretty good chance that, you know, if life does evolve independently on different bodies throughout the galaxy or throughout the solar system, that it might just do it the same way every single time. Sort of like how stars make new helium all the time, but they all sort of make helium that looks the same, right? It's not that, it's not like one star makes a helium that looks different from our sun or something like that, right?
Or like how multiple creatures on Earth have evolved into similar things,
Yeah.
like crabs
Yeah.
and
Or
lobsters.
yeah, or you know, bugs and birds both have wings, right? It's like nobody just developed like a propeller or something. You know what I mean? Like certain structures just tend to be the most effective way of doing business, it seems like. So that's one possibility, is that it turns out it's just some, I don't know, B subtilis, some sort of inert soil bacteria. No big deal. But there's like this small possibility that it could be something really gnarly. And these facilities, even if we manage to get the soil back to Earth and this whole rocket thing works out and it's great. These laboratories leak sometimes, right? It's like it's people can do stupid stuff, right? But test tubes can break open, bad stuff can happen every once in a while. And yeah, we've seen the sort of panic and nightmares that unfold when there's a new strain of something unleashed on the planet. Now, just imagine that it was like super, super devastating. I always like to point out that back in Newton's time, remember Newton? He was the guy who gave us the gravitational equations at first and everything. So Newton did all that work back during a plague. It was actually of the bubonic plague back in England. So he was basically in lockdown during a pandemic back then. But that thing killed 25% of the population. Like that's like bodies piled up in the street. That is really, really devastating. And so we haven't seen anything like that in modern times. I think a lot of people are very afraid that we would welcome in something like that if we bring these samples back. So the plan is still to do this in the 2030s, but I think there's going to be a lot of debate as to whether this actually happens or not. I know that they've set up the sample vials, they're already been collected and cataloged. They're just kind of waiting to go back and really with some sort of technology that can mail them home, but we'll see.
They put it on something like the ISS or something like that instead of bringing it home to kind of compromise.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's what happens.
That
Yeah,
that is the plan. Is to not the ISS probably because it will be out of commission.
something that's
But some form, but probably just some form of that, or it will be the ISS's last mission. Who knows?
that'll be it. Yeah, I think there's actually a horror movie about that happening too. Uh, something. All of these scenarios have been tested out, but I love that because science fiction is kind of where people try out these ideas before they actually go out and do them. It might be one of the most productive fiction genres. Yeah.
You brought up the canals.
Mm.
I thought it's interesting. You can kind of see in that square photo, but I Mars has a lot of like old waterways, like land where it's clear there was meandering rivers and stuff like that long ago. And
Maybe, yeah. Yeah.
we see the exact same things on Earth when rivers dry up and go away. With the same sort of beds and deltas, and right there in that square photo is I believe it's a delta, or there's
Yeah, I want to look at hold on to that thought because I got a bunch more pictures of these things and let's scrutinize them because I think some of them, first of all, wind and first of all, there's not a lot of liquid. There's almost no liquid water on Mars. There's some debatable water shadows here and there on Mars, but it does snow carbon dioxide sometimes. There's other processes that might cause these flowing surfaces. There is some wind. There is a very, very weak atmosphere. So there are some processes that might do that. But yeah, it does appear like there's some flows, but I'm going to look at those in depth. We already talked about this. Oh, they also found they also found some meteorites on Earth, which they believe came from Mars because they have this kind of similar, let's just say, similar elemental makeup as the rocks from Mars that they've analyzed. And they found these little things, and some of the scientists who are analyzing these thought they looked like little creatures. This is, of course, blown up under a microscope. Yeah.
Is that Allen Hill's 8400?
Yeah. You got thoughts?
I recognize it. Yeah, it's a super interesting like thing. I was looking at that at the final project.
Cool. Tell us, what do you know about it?
Well, yeah, it's thought that they kind of look like microbes from Earth, except they were really, really small. They were really, really tiny. So I think there's a lot of research done to like try to disprove that it was life, and the general consensus is that it wasn't organic, but it's just weird because it looks really organic.
It does look a lot, yeah.
And I mean, I wouldn't completely rule out the possibility because I mean, like, I don't know. If it's life from a different planet.
Yep.
If it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, of course, it's going to look different. It's going to be tiny.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, it could even have.
We don't know what it looks like on other planets, so I wouldn't completely rule out the possibility. That's what I'm saying.
That's smart. Yeah, that is pretty cool. I'm glad you recognize that. Yeah, that is exactly what it is. And was Alan Hill a NASA scientist or something, or who is this guy? Do you know?
I have no idea.
Right on. Yeah, it's going to be very, very hard. Actually, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but when they brought all these rocks back from the moon, right? And lo and behold, they found a lot of bacteria on the rocks, right? But what did they say?
They came from the astronauts.
Yeah, right. So it's it's going to be a really hard won battle if remember I said there was two possibilities. One is that life on other planets, let's just keep it to bacteria to keep this simple, looks exactly like bacteria on Earth, right? That's a real possibility. And if that is true, it's going to be really hard to know whether what we're looking at is contamination from the spacecraft, from the astronauts, from reentry, from whatever. It's going to be really hard to tell, honestly. And so that's a genuine concern. But the other possibility is, yeah, maybe it'll look totally different. Yeah, like I was saying, these are little. So maybe the form, the actual morphology of the critters will be different. It's hard to say, but like I said, the jury's still out there. I think every once in a while there's another headline that's like, we definitely found life on Mars. And then big backlash from the scientific community, like, no, we can explain this without life. And so I think that debate could go on for quite a while, even if there was life on there, because there's a real possibility it would be very difficult to distinguish. Yeah.
I mean, one possibility is that I've seen a lot of recently is there being like groundwater
Yeah, let's talk about that.
on Mars.
Yeah.
And it's thought that if there's life there, that could explain some of the material changes that we measure on Mars.
Yeah, this seasonal methane thing is pretty bizarre. But yeah, let's talk about water. I like this picture because it kind of shows the little droplet, shows you how much water's there. This one's a little misleading because the actual droplet for Mars is over there. It's 0.04, so that's 4% of the amount of water remains on Mars, at least today, from projections to what we have here on Earth. And these are just some of the bodies we've looked at in the solar system. We haven't talked about Ganymede yet, but that's one of Jupiter's moons, Europa too, and Titan's out at Saturn. So the reason that they think that, well, we'll get to that in a second, but water, why water? Why does life need water? Anybody ever think about that? Again, we'll get more to this when we start thinking about the origins of life, but I think that it's worth touching on why water? Why do we think water is so important for life? Yeah.
Is it a convenient place for stuff to move around and interact?
And that's a big part of it. Yeah. I think that's one of the huge things. Water, so I think a good way to think about what life is it's very much like a windmill that inserts itself into the wind. And the wind, in this case with life, is usually the flow of some sort of energy. So it's like it could be an electrical flow, it could be a heat flow. There's usually a hot place, a cold place, and the critters get in between and figure out how to get some of that motion and use it to do whatever we want to do, like go to astronomy class or whatever, right? So when you eat food, what you're really doing is you're actually creating a battery that's like an electric circuit between the food and the air. That's really what's happening, is you've inserted yourself into this natural flow of electricity in that case. So water's really good at setting up compartments where you can have, some positively charged species over here and negatively charged. You can imagine setting up a gradient. You can have nutrient gradients. Life loves these gradients. Yeah.
Also, because most life forms on Earth are like mostly comprised of water.
But yeah, the question is, why is that?
99% of
Yeah.
bodies is
Yeah.
water.
99 out of 100 molecules in your body is water. And the question is why? Like, what makes water so special? I mean, it is an amazing, amazing molecule. Did you have something?
Well, I was kind of gonna say like similarly to Dante, like because of all things on Earth having water, but like what if that's just not the case other places?
That's a possibility too, for sure. There might be a way that entities have organized themselves that are completely beyond our imagination. A lot of people are trying to. There's a very popular movement right now that's trying to argue that silicon-based life forms are going to be a thing in the future, right? A lot of people think these chatbot thingies are gonna like wake up soon or something, right? I'm personally not buying it, but it's a legitimate argument that there could be some other way of achieving sentience and some other way of achieving what life does, which turns out to actually be a really difficult thing to put your thumb on. What exactly makes something alive, even though like children recognize it, it's very hard to define. So what else? Any other thoughts about water? What is it that's so special about water? It's a really crazy molecule. Yeah.
It's also kind of like a fairly neutral substance as far as like I don't know. I've never taken chemistry, but like as far as like chemical content, like how it like moves compared to other things on the periodic table.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. Yeah, it's not super caustic, right? So it does dissolve things really well, but it doesn't destroy molecules for the most part, which is really a really convenient feature. With regards to its neutrality, it's also a beautiful electrical molecule because it has a positively charged and it has negatively charged pieces on it, which means that when it comes to dissolving stuff, part of it can dissolve the positively charged, let's say the acidic versus the basic stuff, and the other part can dissolve the other stuff. So it can basically dissolve anything, which is wonderful. So you can solubilize everything from, fats and sugars and salts and all this stuff. It can go into solution, which means it can move around the organism really nicely. Yeah.
One thing that I do think is kind of odd about water is that unlike most materials, when it becomes a solid, it loses density
Mm.
instead of gaining density.
Yeah, it's really weird. It expands when it freezes. That's actually really unique. Most molecules don't do that. It's pretty bizarre. It has a pretty good range for which it stays liquid too. I know we've talked about how liquid water is pretty rare in the solar system, and it is true. And we say the Earth is in this perfect spot, which is true, but that perfect spot is actually, compared to other liquids, is actually pretty wide. So there's a pretty big range upon which liquid water will exist, whereas with most other molecules, it's pretty narrow. So I don't know. It's just a cool thing. We'll keep circling back on this. I think trying to understand the relationship between water and life is about as complex as trying to understand what life is in and of itself. And like there has been a tremendous search for water. Like Dante said, people generally believe that it probably does exist beneath the surface to some extent. So this is actually like the edge of, I believe, a carbon, like a dry ice field, where there's like a little slope, and they actually detected some liquid water sort of oozing out of the side of that. So here's another. This is actually a terrible picture of it, but out of the side of one of these, they did some analysis of some water seeping out of the sides of it. The ice caps actually on at Mars. If you look at it, if you go back, let's see if we can find a good picture of Mars from the beginning. Maybe there we go. You can see it has these ice caps, these polar ice caps, kind of like the Earth does, right? Seasonally, but those ice caps are actually made out of carbon dioxide, not water. The hope is, and the belief is, through different spectral analysis, is that there is a bunch of water underneath those ice caps, but the ice itself is actually dry ice, carbon dioxide ice, which is pretty crazy. You guys ever mess with dry ice? Like smoke. What do they call it? It's like smoke machines and stuff like that. I don't know if that's how they do it, but it's pretty wild stuff. Gets quite cold. It's fun to play with.
Yeah, touch it with your bare hands.
Yeah, you can burn yourself with it. Um, when I was working in labs, like when I was younger, you could make little like not I don't want to use the word bombs, but you can make little bombs with it, like where you just put some dry ice in with some water and like shake it up and throw it across the room, and it evaporates very quickly. It actually goes from solid to gas very quickly, and that's why it does the smoky thing that it does. So, yeah, carbon dioxide, um, rain, and snow, which is really crazy. Um, let's think a little bit about the geology a bit more. Oh, the soil's kind of interesting. This is going to be a huge problem if we do try to go and colonize this place. So there's a chemical in the soil called perchlorate, which may as well just be called poison. It's really, really nasty stuff. It will destroy your lungs if you breathe it in. And I think this is one of the biggest problems we're going to face in the early experiences trying to colonize space. So the moon, we talked about the moon. It's very dusty, but it's generally, this lunar regolith isn't particularly toxic in and of itself. The astronauts who, let's say they set up a base on Mars and they go outside for a walk, they're gonna have to be really, really careful about cleaning themselves off because this dust, literally the dirt on the surface of Mars is in and of itself quite dangerous to humans. That's gonna make for a challenge in and of itself.
What does it do to the human body?
That's a great question, actually. Let's see if I can figure that out. I know that it's toxic to the lining of the lungs. I'd have to study it more. It's a very basic solution, so I imagine it's kind of like taking a big breath of bleach or something, or ammonia or something like that. Just very caustic and probably disrupts the surfaces of those tissues in some way. It might dry them out too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, would it be called? I know we call it all the geology, but I do think it's kind of funny how it's geophysics.
Yeah. Good point.
Marology, like
Yeah. Marsology?
marology.
Marology? Yeah. Yeah. Geology is a really funny word. I didn't know a better word for it. There's not a ton to say about it. Actually, this is maybe the best, maybe a picture's worth 1,000 words when it comes to Marsology or Mars geology or whatever you want to call it, the rock natural history of Mars. So this is a picture of depressions, which are blue, versus high elevation points, which are red all the way up to white here. It's a very lopsided planet, actually. This is the first thing you might notice about it. Very, very interesting. So the bottom half of the planet is this, very pockmarked kind of magmatic, almost highland. And the northern part is pretty well preserved, flat, scoured. And so whatever stories we want to tell about the natural history of Mars, they have to incorporate this bizarre feature into it. So one of the biggest arguments for why people think that Mars was covered in oceans at some point was because of this really flat place up top, which is, a pretty good argument, because if you think about it, if you start asking the question, if why aren't there any meteors on the top part of Mars? That's a really good question. Like, why are there no impact craters up there? Well, maybe there was an ocean there at some point. Seems like a reasonable guess as to why that would be the case. The next question then would be, why is there this huge basin up there? Like, why was the depression at the top of the planet? This gets a little sketchy, and I don't think anybody's really answered this to anybody's satisfaction. So the best guess anybody seems to have, outside of the sort of planetary metamorphosis stuff we explored, outside of that, it's basically that this thing got smacked on the head with a huge, like, Ceres-sized dwarf planet at some point in its deep past, right? And so what we're looking at, this is kind of hard because it's a square, flat projection, but basically it's a giant impact crater is kind of the best idea that people have come up with. The problem is that when you try to do the simulations to make it look like you try to hit it with a planet, you don't really get the right shape for this basin. So I think people are generally unhappy with this explanation, but it is the best one well, let's say it's the one that ends up in the textbook from what I can tell. Yeah.
Also, that lower, like little,
That basin?
yeah, that little basin.
Yeah, same kind of thing. It's weird because it doesn't totally look like an impact crater is the
No.
thing. Right. There's some other features too. I think I'm very sorry to disappoint you, but we have a really hard time telling a story about Mars. It's a very, very strange surface features. It's perhaps even more difficult than our own planet for telling a story. Now, another thing you might notice, this is kind of a really interesting set of features over here. You see these volcanoes over there, right?
Like Olympus Mons.
Olympus Mons, yeah. So it's the biggest one that we know of in the solar system, this thing. It's much bigger than Everest as far as mountains go, and it's a volcano. And there's a bunch of volcanoes over there where Olympus Mons is at too. Here's a close-up of that Olympus Mons one too. I think this is a composite picture, which is a huge shield volcano over there. You know, depending on how you gauge it from like its northwest margin to its peak, it's over 13 miles high, which is twice the height of Mauna Kea. It is enormous. It is absolutely enormous. So 3 times the height of Mount Everest. Unbelievable. So something strange happened over here, and you can imagine that this entire plateau is sort of a volcanic outflow. The real question then becomes, why isn't it at the top? Why is there no volcanic activity or anything like that at the top of the planet? It's very, very strange, very mysterious. Another piece of this puzzle, let's see if I can find a good picture of that. Another piece of this puzzle is this really crazy scar over here. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
There's a big gash over there. Big, it's often referred to as a canyon. Actually, it got its name, it's called the Valles Marineris. And actually its name, believe it or not, came from its original naming on the canal diagrams. So it still has the same name that it had when it was a canal, but now it's a canyon. But it's pretty bizarre. It kind of just looks like as if someone took their fingernails, like a huge monster took its fingernails and dragged it across the surface of the planet. There's a sort of close-up of this thing.
That's what I was
Pretty crazy, right? So what did this? I mean, this is, I think, one of the coolest mysteries. Now, there's kind of a standard explanation, but I'm not sure that they've nailed this one yet. So the standard explanation is that as all of this volcanic goop came out and cooled, that it sort of hardened and fractured, and it added a lot of weight to the surface of the planet as well. And that sort of resulted, as you can see in the upper diagram, as these cracks forming, and as the cracks form, the middle part of it settled down, and you ended up with this canyon land. Yeah, what do you got?
For scale, that canyon is a little bit bigger than the Mediterranean Sea.
It's really big. It's actually almost the length of the United States. I'll show you a picture in a second that compares the two. So I don't know. That's one of the. I think that one's really cool. Now, there's been a couple of philosophers who have tried to address this in terms of like glancing impact type things too, which I think is really compelling. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think? It honestly just looks like it got scraped up against something. Yeah.
For a glancing impact, wouldn't it have been like extremely high speed for it not to like have basically just gotten sucked in and had a large impact at the end of it?
Yeah, the glancing impact one is hard. It's harder. So yeah, I'll give you one other idea in a second. Go ahead.
Well, there are two things. One, glancing impacts don't ever really look like that. They often leave like basins of like the
Like molten out. Like yeah. You would think so. Yeah.
They don't leave cracks like that. And two, it seems very similar to me to both the Grand Canyon we have here and other like sort of plate. It could be a plate tectonic like fault line, but it could also be water because water also carves, or something else similar to that that carves.
The water one's tricky because, like with the Grand Canyon, you actually have this huge mountains that drain water down into it. So you have an inlet and an outlet. Now you can make an argument that there might be a sort of outlet, but the inlet thing is a bit harder to see. Although I don't know, maybe that is it. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the Baraganka crater?
No.
It's up in Siberia in permafrost.
Huh.
It is melting, and it's caused like this giant gash to open up all across the land. And it's
very cool.
Somewhat similar than that, other than that one's kind of mushrooming out now.
Interesting.
The initial part is like a thin gash.
Interesting.
Straight vertical walls on both sides.
Interesting. Yeah.
The reason I brought it up is because you see the very tall, the highest elevation points on Mars are right next to it.
Yeah, that is a fair point.
That's why I brought it up, because we see that quite often on Earth.
That is a fair
I wouldn't
point.
be surprised if it was something like that.
Yeah, I could see it. I could absolutely see it. So there's this crazy dude too back in let's say probably in the 20s or 30s, who wrote a book called Worlds in Collision. His name was Immanuel Velikovsky. You guys heard of this guy before? Kind of like a darling of like the weirdo fringe cosmology type of people. But it was actually quite interesting. So he actually had this hypothesis where he thought maybe there was basically a passing by body of some sort, like either a planet. I think he actually imagined it was a planet, which is either resettled into a new orbit or is no longer with us, which basically had a different electrical potential, and there was a huge lightning arc, basically a big arc welding torch that drifted between the two planets. And he tries to, it seems super crazy, but this was actually a dude, this was another one of those people that actually Einstein was corresponding with at the time of his death and actually took some of this stuff quite seriously. I think people were less allergic to far-out ideas back in the early 20th century, perhaps. Now, nobody takes this guy seriously today, but it's a pretty cool idea. And actually, there's a few different types of riverine trenches on Mars. Some of them do look like flow channels, like what Dante was saying. But some of them have this really weird fractal pattern to them that's a little bit different. And there's actually some on Earth that are a bit difficult to explain using traditional flow patterns too. And so these guys who were talking about this electrical arcing event, they actually had some ammunition when it came to the mechanism. So have you guys ever seen somebody put like an electric current up to a piece of wood before? It actually makes really similar looking patterns to some of these riverine pieces on Mars. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that also happens with, it mostly happens on Earth with water, actually.
Some of them
Lightning strikes near like a river. It can happen, and you can see, and it's actually something like that. When I was studying bird science here in Ashland, the Bear Creek Rogue River. Sometimes when lightning strikes near it, they're about the same size as that little.
Just little little patterns.
Tiny.
Yeah, yeah.
But I surmise they could probably be bigger.
Yeah, so some of the ones that we see on Mars are like this, right? You're gonna see some of these little, like almost like dendritic patterns. Now there are some that look very obviously like flows, and they could have been carbon dioxide melt flows. They could have been from an earlier atmosphere. They could be from the water in the past. We don't know. But this is, I don't know. It's a fun idea to think that there might be a lot of different processes that could etch these. And actually, as we move out into the solar system, depending how much time we have, we'll see some of these very strange dendritic patterns on some of the other moons too. And I think that there probably are a lot of different processes that happen that are quite rare and infrequent, that we just have a really hard time mapping onto some steady change. The water arguments are always nice because they're this kind of gradual change thing. We're familiar with seeing some of them on Earth. But there might be more than one ways to bake a cake at the end of the day. All right, so what else do we want to say about Mars before we let this go? I mean, its atmosphere is pretty miserable. I'm not going to dwell on that. It's losing its atmosphere at an appreciable rate still, which is a bit sad. Let's say we do go there. Maybe you guys can think about this for next time, and I'll send you home with another piece of mental homework, which is, first of all, do you think we should go to Mars? Is that a good idea? Would you rather us go to Venus and maybe set up a sky world in the clouds up there instead? Would that be a better idea?
Why not both?
Why not both? Okay, maybe, but let's think about it. Let's think about what it would take. So, you know, one possibility is the dream that maybe we can transform Mars from this desert hellscape into a beautiful planet like ours. What would that take? How would we actually go about doing that? Well, one problem is that the thing doesn't have an active dynamo anymore. It doesn't have a magnetic field. And so if you do manage to create an atmosphere, and maybe you guys can tell me your ideas for how you'd make an atmosphere next time. But if you do make an atmosphere, you got to keep it there. And that means you're going to need some sort of a magnetic field structure to do that. So instead of, you know, one possibility is that we make an artificial magnetic field for the planet to keep in whatever atmosphere we end up growing while we're there. The problem is that that's going to be a really, really expensive endeavor. Not because we can't make really strong magnets. We can. Actually, MRI machines are way stronger than what we would need for this. The problem is the spatial extent of it, right? So we could park a satellite. You guys remember when we talked about Lagrange points? There's these stable little pockets where you can set satellites. We set a lot of space telescopes out at our Lagrange points between the Earth-Moon system on the Earth-Sun system. There's basically just these balance points where the gravity of the bodies will hold something still between the Earth and the Sun or the Moon or whatever. We could park one at the Sun Mars side, Lagrange point. We could park a satellite there if it could generate a huge magnet, and it would shield the planet from all that nasty solar wind that would strip its atmosphere, assuming we could make an atmosphere. The problem is it would have to be really big, not really strong, but really big. And nobody's really figured out a great way to do that. So technologically, it's feasible. The problem is that it would basically require, using today's way of making magnets, you know, you'd need something the size of the moon, basically, to shield the planet. So I want you guys to think between now and Thursday about seriously, like contemplate what it would look like to live on this place with toxic soil, no atmosphere, extreme radiation. Do you think that we can do it? Can we transform the place? Is it worth it? Uh, it's something I think to contemplate. One last thought.
This is a piece of information to also take, or I think people should take with them is, I mean, here you show the core. I remember I was taught not that long ago, that Mars had its core became solid, it cooled down, and that's why it doesn't like feel. Except it isn't. It has
Yeah.
a core. It has basically the same core makeup that Earth does.
It is really weird.
It's identical.
It is really, really weird. Yeah, we can talk about that too a little bit. This is again I think that if you were scientists starting out today, I'm going to be an astrophysicist, or I'm going to be a planetary scientist who understands the planets. The biggest mystery in the whole solar system, as far as I can tell, you know, other than where did these planets come from, might be why are ostensibly similar bodies like Earth, Venus, and Mars, why are some of them like us, have an amazing magnetic field, and some of them don't? Despite the fact that their interiors aren't really that different, they appear to have convecting mantles and stuff. This is very, very bizarre. So yeah, big mysteries. Let's think about it. We'll talk at the beginning of class before we get into the Jovians about how we would make Mars a livable place, if that is indeed a good idea, and whether you guys are signing up to go there. But all right, have a good week, guys. We'll see you on Thursday.